So, as we make our way from the incredible holiday of Purim along the journey towards Pesach, I thought it would be really opportune to spend some time together each day studying and meditating on the texts of the Seder Night. The Seder Night is somewhat of a mystery to so many of us. The family gathers around the table and we all pull out our wine stained Haggadahs as we, sit together to discuss, allegedly, the story of the Jewish people's freedom. And yet, as we kind of make our way through the text, yeah, we get our Mani Shtana and we get our Avadim Hayinu, but we start encountering all sorts of other details going on in the story, things that don't really seem to have to do with the Seder night itself. And so, what I thought would be really valuable to do is that over the series of the next couple of weeks leading up to Pesach, to really try to analyze and understand what are the obligations that we're trying to fulfill on the Seder night, and how does the Haggadah Shel Pesach facilitate us towards those ends. I think that if we can kind of grapple with some of the texts that underlie the whole performance of the ritual of the Seder, we can come in with a deeper understanding and ultimately a more enriched experience, which can translate into a more effective way of experiencing the freedom that Pesach night has to offer. I'm Chaim Davies, and this is the Chaim Davies Show. Welcome back to the show. So, if we're really going to analyze and understand the Seder in a way that can open up its mysteries to us, that's going to have to take place by analyzing the text itself and really taking it piece by piece, understanding how does the book flow from one cover to the end. But before we can start grappling with the text of the Haggadah itself, there's really no better place to start than by taking a look at how the Rambam presents the fundamental obligations of Seder night. And the place that he does this is, of course, in his Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah is his massive magnum opus, his incredible 14-volume work, where he presents all the 613 mitzvot in all of their meaning and details and implications. And this is, of course, based on not on just his own, thought, but it's based on the 2,000 years of rabbinic scholarship that preceded him. And so when we open up volume 3 of the Mishnah Torah, known as Sefer Zmanim, or the Book of Times, we find a section called Hilchot Chametz Umatzah, the laws of leavened and unleavened bread, which is actually where the Rambam presents all the laws that relate to Pesach. And in chapter 7, he begins to treat the Seder night itself, and he describes what are the nature of the obligations and how we meant to fulfill the mitzvot of the night. And so I'd like to take a look with you today at the opening of this presentation. When many of us think about what is the obligation of the Seder night, the verse that comes to mind, if any, is V'higarat levincha bayom hahu, that we should tell over to our children on that night all the events that God had done for the Jewish people as he took us out from Egypt. But that's not the verse that the Rambam brings to present the fundamental obligation of the Seder night. And perhaps the reason, or one of the reasons why he does not conclude that that's the correct text, is because V'higarat levincha is family specific. I mean, what if you don't have a family? What if you don't have children at your table? What if you don't have children at all? Are you unable to fulfill the mitzvah of the night? And so the Rambam actually tells us that there's a different verse, and he's basing this off of the Tanaic Midrashim, that there's actually a different verse, which is the basis of this mitzvah. And I'll just mention that the edition of the Mishnah Torah that I'm using, and that I recommend to everybody to use as well, is the Mif'al Mishneh Torah edition of the Mishnah Torah. It's a beautiful and really masterfully produced publication of the Mishnah Torah, published a few years back in Israel, and it's based off of handwritten manuscripts. So it's considered to be the critical edition of the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, and it also has this accompanying, really easy-to-read commentary based on the Rambam's other writings and other supporting texts as well. So it's really a beautiful edition. You can also get this version of the text online for free at alhatorah.org. I think it's rambam.alhatorah.org, where you can check this out and you could follow along in the exact same edition. Be that as it may, let's dive into his opening presentation here. So he says, Mitzvat aseh shel Torah, l'saper b'nisim v'niflaot shenasu l'avotenu b'Mitzrayim. We have a biblical obligation to tell over the stories and the wonders, the miracles that happened to our ancestors in Egypt, the entire events of the slavery to redemption process. Shene'emar, and how do I know that this is the case? Because the verse says, Zachor et hayom hazeh asher yatzatem miMitzrayim. Be mindful, remember this day that you left Egypt. And so the Rambam does not bring the verse of V'higarat levincha. Instead, the Rambam sees that this verse of Zachor et hayom hazeh, remember the day that you left Egypt, be mindful of that day, is actually where the obligation comes from. And he's actually basing this off of earlier midrashic sources as well. But I think the idea that pops right off the page about this is that what is this idea of zechira? What does it mean to be mindful of? So an amazing thing that happens in the Torah is that almost every time, someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially every time the Torah asks of us to remember something, it's also a call to action. Right? So a great example of this is, as the Rambam brings momentarily, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho. We have an obligation to remember Shabbos, to sanctify it, and what that manifests in is words. We're meant to recite Kiddush, and that's actually the text that we use when we sanctify Shabbos at the beginning and when we close off Shabbos with Havdalah at the end. Another example of this would be the remembrance of Amalek, where we're meant to remember all the things that Amalek did to us on our way out from Egypt, and that's coupled with the obligation to wipe out the memory of Amalek. So almost everywhere that the Torah talks about Zechira, it's not just about knowing something that you didn't know before. It's actually about remembering, bringing something back into your consciousness, reconnecting it with your sense of awareness that you have right here, right now. And it's because this is the obligation that the question of, well, what if I don't have anyone else at my Seder, sort of falls apart. Because the obligation is not to inform the uninformed, to tell your children about a story that they don't yet know. The obligation is for each and every individual to become mindful of the events that took place and the process of slavery to redemption. And that's something that we'll see has many implications in the process of the Haggadah Shel Pesach itself. But it's because of this reason that this is the obligation, the mitzvah of Zachor, to remember, to be mindful, that the Rambam continues and says that even if a person doesn't have any children, even if they are a Talmid Chacham, afilu Chachamim Gedolim, even if someone is a tremendous scholar, Chayavin l'saper b'tziat Mitzrayim, everyone is obligated to tell over the story of the Exodus of Egypt. Because it's not about becoming informed, becoming educated. It's about becoming aware, becoming mindful, reintegrating into your active experience of life what it means to be free today. Because the truth is that knowing that you're free does very little if you don't experience that you're free. And as we'll see, the process of Zachor is meant to not only let you know that you're free, that the Jewish people were free 3,300 years ago, okay, let's get on with the show already, but it's to experience freedom. As we say in our prayers, Pesach is a Zman Cherutenu. It's the time of our freedom. And it's an opportunity for us, if we can bring ourselves into that mindfulness, to really unleash ourselves, to unlock our potential, and to access freedom in a completely new way. Now, it's true, the Rambam does bring the verse of V'higara to levincha, you should tell over to your children, in the subsequent paragraph. But he only brings that in the context of someone who has a child. So that if a person has a child, then they're obligated to channel their mitzvah of zechira, to funnel their remembrance, their own mindfulness, through the children or the guests that they have at the table. But the fundamental obligation that we are meant to be fulfilling is indeed the mitzvah of zechira. We'll leave off with that for today. Until next time, I'm Chaim Davies, and this is the Chaim Davies Show.